So, yes, recording in progress. So I want to share some pictures, and what I would like to especially is to have something like a conversation where you ask lots of stuff, because I'm going to explain how I understand composition and framing, and why I think it works, especially for those of you that want to do more complex compositions, right? One of the things that people usually ask me is how to do more complex compositions, basically moving forward after rule of thirds and these kind of things. So I'm going to explain my process and why I think it works, different techniques that you can find everywhere pretty much, and the use of color as well, and all of those things. But I would like to have questions and all of those kind of things and wonderings that you might have, because obviously the examples I'm going to show are my own pictures, and it's interesting to understand that it's always going to be a slight difference between styles, right? So mine, if you have seen my work a little bit, obviously, it's a little bit more squared, let's say, a little bit more mathematic or something like that. There's people that it's a little bit more rough in their style, which is definitely fine. But the foundation of how you compose and how you tell different things through composition is going to be the same. And that's important to know, because there's no, it's not important that my way is the only way, because I pick very well the backgrounds. I think that the idea that to have in mind the backgrounds, for example, it's important no matter what kind of style or kind of dynamic that you want to try to show with your pictures. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Or for example, there's some people that here that's lots of black and white, and I think that it's not really super into the people's mind thinking about composition and having in account color or black and white for the composition, being color even trickier if you want to compose, because you need to be aware of what's going on with the palette and the color combinations, and these things is going to affect on how the viewer is going to read the picture. Make sense?
So the composition is referring only to one photo, not to a series, then? Or do you have the series in mind? Like,
yeah, we're going to talk about different ways of composing pictures, and this is a good question actually, because going back a little bit to the common question of people asking for the layer pictures, which is kind of the mystery for lots of people, how to do this complex layering kind of stuff. It's important. One of the things that I always say, and we will touch this later when I show the examples, one of the things I always say is that the complex compositions, like any other composition, needs to serve a purpose. So I mean, if you are going to do a layer picture that is complex to read and all that, needs to be for a reason. It's not just because it's cool. So we always have to have in mind that the viewer is not going to be another photographer that is going to say, oh, that's cool composition, which is so great. But if we, for example, in a sequence or in a body of work, we have too many complicated pictures to read, first of all, there's not going to be dynamics in the sequence or in the body of work. It's going to be flat, but flat in a way also that it's hard to read and can be boring. And one great example of that, for example, I don't know if some of you are familiar with Alex Webb, classic. People talk about his compositions a lot. Someone posted a cool analysis about his work the other day in the Hub. If you are familiar with a book that it's called The Suffering of Light, and if you don't have it, you can check it online and see what's going on. It's like 110 pictures, and all of them are quite complex. And what happens, even for photographers, it gets so intense, let's say, that you get bored of it. I mean, we as a photographers, we tend to do the effort to go through that kind of stuff way more than a normal viewer would be, right? Because we're interested in see what's going on. But for a normal reader or viewer or audience, they are going to say that this is what's going on here. It's just too much, if that makes sense. So it's important to have in mind composition when you are thinking about projects, for example. So any question? Say yes.
Sorry.
No, please.
So if you let's say if you plan a series, you think about, okay, so I'm gonna have some complex photos, some that are easier to read, like that it's a flow that people can enter?
Yes, I think that it's a good way of thinking about it. I think that more than try to project the project through what kind of compositions are you going to do, what I would do is to look for what kind of pictures do I need for a story, right? For example, and this is more or less mainstream, you know, like most people knows, for a normal story, you need details, establishing shots to show context, some kind of action, and to say who's the subject, like through portraits or stuff like that. So it's 3 or 4 kinds of pictures. What you can do, for example, and what usually happens is that the complicated compositions, the layered ones, are going to be usually the ones with action, right? Because it's easier. There are things happening, and if you have that kind of mindset, you can try to put together this depth when there's things going on. But for example, if you try to do a portrait of someone, it's not going to fit to have a layer picture. You can have an environmental portrait, if you like, showing more of the context or more like a close-up. But the point of that portrait is going to be the main subject of the portrait. Therefore, trying to make it complex, it doesn't really make sense, if that makes sense. So the same would be with the details. For example, there's people that is more heavy on details, people that is less heavy on details. But a detail, if we think about it, would be some kind of close-up of a thing, for example, like a kind of pattern, something like that. That's going to tend to be also simple, right? Because you're going to focus in a detail precisely. And if you try to make it complex, it loses the point of showing a detail of something. So I would say that it's less about thinking, I'm going to have a variety of compositions, and it would be more like, I'm going to have a variety of kinds of pictures and distances, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, when Christelle was working with us when we were working on our Mississippi theme,
yeah,
she talked a lot about the best way to pair.
Yeah,
which because there's all the different types of things.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's something that it happens a little bit more organically when you are taking the pictures, right? But it's something that you definitely see when you are putting something together. Is when you start to have, for example, loads of people. You go, I don't know, an easy example would be to go to someone's Instagram, and it is for all of us, right? We tend to put the same kind of stuff all the time because it works or whatever reason, and everything feels the same distance, for example, and it feels flat because it's the same kind of distance and the same kind of lines and the same kind of techniques, because on paper it should work, getting engagement or attention from people, right? So when you are making the sequence or some kind of sequence, it's important to have in mind that if you have the rest of stuff that you need, the more simple stuff, the more complex, the different distances, all of these things, you are going to have the dynamics that are going to make the whole thing engaging, right? Which is pretty cool. But those are different things, definitely. There's different workshops. So we're going to start with composition. I want to start with something that's kind of basic, but I think that it's important even for experienced photographers to remember and to have in mind more than we do, which is the great difference between framing and composing, right? So both of those things are entangled, obviously, right? Because you need to frame stuff to compose with them, but it's a fundamental difference there, is that when you frame a picture or an action or something like that, you are editing what you have in front of you. So you are somehow starting to decide what's the interesting aspect of what you are photographing, and then how are you going to compose those things that you have inside the frame to make it work for the viewer to go through the picture, which is the only reason to compose and to use these techniques like rule of thirds and things like that, is to guide the viewer through the frame in a hierarchy, if that makes sense, right? And I think that idea is the basic idea on how people compose. Either it's going, if it's something more abstract, or it's more artistic, or it's more documentary, or it's more complex, or it's more simple. Always the foundation is going to be that you are telling the viewer that you have to start here, and from this intersection that will be rule of thirds, you have to go to this other way, and you start to build geometries and things like that, or using guiding lines and all of those sorts of things. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to show some pictures, and as I said, please, if you have questions, don't hesitate on telling me. I think that the first thing that I'm going to show is how is the most basic thing. Let me share the screen. Okay. Let me know if you can see the screen, the pictures yes. Properly.
Cool.
I think that it's not properly.
It's a zoom on the yes.
There it is.
Now it's better.
Oh, it's
right?
good.
Okay, let me. Oh fuck! Well, I'm creating a mess here. Okay, can we see the picture? These two Guajiros in Cuba. So this third line of examples, what I want to show is how, Jesus Christ. What I want to show is how really, this is nonsense. I don't know what's going on. Okay. What I want to show is how I do my compositions, which is always using the very basic rule of thirds. And sometimes it feels more complicated than it is because how you frame it, right? But the foundation of the picture, and this is going to be true later on, even when I start to build complexity with my compositions, is I always start with the very basic stuff, which is the rule of thirds, right? So this guy would be, and I'm not that mathematic as people think. I always say that these rules are an approximation. You don't need to be like right there in the intersection. Around rule of thirds is going to work. And I think that this is quite important to be aware, because it doesn't really matter if you are talking about things, for example, or a landscape like this one, or talking about people or even actions. When you start with a good foundation, you are always going to be precise on your message. You're saying, start here. And that's something that is always going to be powerful, because it's because of the aesthetic, because of how the viewer and in any kind of culture reads any kind of picture, is always going to start with the same point. And if it's not there, they're going to look for it. And if they don't find it, they're going to lose engagement. And what happens here, I think this is why I'm stressing so much this idea of the foundation of any kind of composition needs to be in thirds, or something like that. I would say, let's go to Leonardo da Vinci. We're going to have, that's the same thing. I mean, the golden ratio, all of those things, Fibonacci thing, it's the same stuff, right? The rule of thirds will be a simplification of that, because it's easier to figure out in a frame, in a camera. But basically, it's that idea, is that you have that line of reading that is going to make easier to go through stuff, right? So all of these examples, even if some of them look a little bit more complex than others, what's going on is that they are all the same, right? I'm centering my attention and maybe dividing the frame, but always the main subject is going to be in thirds, around thirds, right? And I think that this is interesting because often, if we tend to look for first the complexity, we lose part of the message. So I think that, for example, this picture is way more powerful because the only thing that you can see is this guy with a flamethrower, which is pretty weird, I think, in the middle of a parking lot with some cars. You have a little bit of context, but the whole point of this thing, imagine that there is other people and more things going on, and cars doing stuff with the drifting and all of those things. It could be a cool picture, but I think that is way stronger, especially if you have in mind that eventually you're going to develop some kind of sequence, right? Having that in mind is always important, because then you have less pressure to do every picture very flashy, right? Here, I want to say there's this crazy guy that was in the middle of Phoenix, Arizona, with a flamethrower, right? And maybe because the message is straightforward, you will want to know more of what's going on. So if I try to show you too much, and maybe I'm not successful with that, you're not going to keep looking to the story, right? Because it's too confusing. Although the guy with a flamethrower is always interesting.
And how did you meet him?
How did I meet these people?
I don't want to meet this man.
And that's, well, it's pretty easy actually. If you go to Phoenix, Arizona, there's this thing people does there, which is to do, it's illegal actually, but they are not shy about it. So you can just try to figure, because they post everything in Instagram, and you can just contact them and say, hey, I want to photograph this craziness.
There's some, okay.
So they
crazy people.
Yeah. So what I mean, in this case, it was obviously, I spent there a couple of months, so I met them and I showed my thing. So the whole thing about access is that you need to do a little bit of work beforehand, as you probably know, right? It's not, I didn't show up there, but yeah. So again, as you can see, all of these pictures are based in the same principle, which is the starting point. It's easy, and then you will start to see, and let me go to this other section, and then you will start to see why I do that, right? And how I start to put complexity to these pictures. So for example, in this picture, which is the flying monk that I like a lot, as you can see, what I do is to do the same stuff, right? The monk is around thirds, but there's this other thing, what we call frame within a frame, like subframing, which is with the door. That's me already adding complexity, right? I could try to do this without the door, but the fact that I'm using some kind of element to subframe the action is going to give this sense of dynamic, this sense of depth, that it will be okay, but this is a tiny bit more, and it's an easy way to compose a little bit in a little bit more dynamic way, if that makes sense, right? Because subframing is something that you can find pretty much everywhere, which is pretty cool. So this guy is, I mean, this is in a monastery, but also you can look for this kind of stuff, which is through a car window, right? And again, it's not only adding a little bit more of a depth and dynamics to the composition. You can look for the main guy, which is this guy smoking a cigarette, is in thirds as well. But I also am adding a little bit of information there, so looking for the steering wheel of the car, the color, and together with the rest of the sequence and the whole thing, then you can tell that it's Cuba or something related to that, right? But still pretty simple, which is the point here. So as you are going to see, the foundation of all of it is that I tend to always be very precise with the main subject, or where is he or she going to be, right? Which is always going to be in thirds. And the main subject in this, like many of these examples, is going to be a person or group of people, but it can be a thing, obviously, as well.
I have a question, Jorge.
Yes.
How many shots would you say you take per sequence, or does it depend? Because I know obviously if you're shooting with analog, you're more limited, but with digital, you can basically take unlimited amount of shots and then just select the best one.
Yeah. That's a good question. You mean for sequence or for any kind of situation? Which is
Any
could be-
situation like something catches your eye and
Yeah.
you frame the image,
Yeah.
do you kind of stand there for a while and take a bunch of images in a row, or do you more wait for that like perfect moment?
It's a great question, actually. Hey, the thing is that it depends a little bit of who you ask. They're going to tell you different stuff. I'm the kind of people that don't shoot a lot when I'm because I started with film and I didn't get used to I didn't get used to like having like 1,000 pictures for every time.
Yeah.
So I would say that what I tend to do is to, and we're going to talk about this later, but what I tend to do, because my kind of work is very related not only with the subjects and the people that it's around there, but also, to me, always the space is also a subject. What I tend to do is do more the waiting. So I see an opportunity in the sense of that I find an interesting background, an interesting thing like the car that matches the colors, and then I see that there's people walking around. So I'm going to look for that, and maybe I take 3 or 4 pictures, and that's it. There's people that takes 15 or 20, which is not a lot either, right? But what I definitely would tell you is that, and this is cool that you are using film, for example, because you are training yourself not to waste film. Therefore, you're going to try to design the composition, which is what I do, for example. And this is what everybody that it's good composing, I think it does, which is imagine the composition, how it could be, right? How it's going to be more or less like an approximation in your mind, and then you try to go for it. There is this analogy that I find very cool, that it's a fighter pilot approach. The fighter pilots, which is pretty cool, they say that when they do a maneuver, they look for an 80% solution of the maneuver, which is pretty amazing because they are going with this multi-billion-dollar stuff. You would imagine that they go for the perfect thing, but they don't. So they look for the 80% solution and they correct from it to get to the thing that they want. With photography, I think that you can do the same. You can look for a rough approximation of how you imagine the output is going to be, and then working the scene means to correct this 20% that it's lacking yet, if that makes sense. And that 20%, it can be 5 or 6 pictures, or maybe 15 or 20, it's depending on the person. But I prefer, and I would recommend to everyone, try to foresee somehow how it could look first, and then do the picture. Obviously, all of this in very brief moments, right? You don't have really 2 hours to do a composition. I mean, you have sometimes, but sometimes there's someone that is intriguing for you, or something interesting is happening, so you have to go fast. But with a little bit of training and a little bit of looking for and having in mind these ideas, you know that the first thing that you have to do is to look for the background, to see what's going on with the background, and to position your subject in thirds. And then you know that at the very least you have a good foundation for a picture. And if the moment passes, at the very least you have something that is solid, if that makes sense. If you have a little bit more time, you keep shooting, and maybe you do like something else, like you wait for someone else to add a little bit more complexity, and you add a silhouette there that it's in contrast with the person is not in a silhouette or something like that, right? Because you have a little bit more time. But the first 80% is what you have to foresee somehow before you take the picture. It makes sense, more or less, what I'm saying?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Do you only shoot analog, or also the digital?
No, I mainly shoot digital. I have some analog pictures here because I don't know, I like them. I think they're good examples. But I mostly shoot analog when I have a commission that a client asks me for it. In this case, it was the brand Lomography. I don't know if someone is familiar with it. They make film, like it's like cheap film, and they commissioned me to go to Cuba with for 11 days with 11 rolls of Lomo 400. And that's this picture, for example. And that became an exhibition and things like that. But that was the, because it's pretty expensive. I like it a lot, but I think it's pretty expensive, especially now.
It's incredible. It's like 15 euros, one roll of the film.
Yeah, so imagine.
I just said, okay, sorry, I stick to digital for the moment.
Yeah, me too. So if someone asks me, I say, yeah, this is the budget. So if you want to pay for it.
Yeah, so
great.
expensive. 15 euros for a Kodak Pro.
It's crazy. But yeah. So now we're starting to see a few different things here. And I think that this picture is a good example.
Sorry. Sorry.
It's fine. Dogs are friends.
Stop it.
I think that this picture is a good example of different techniques all together already. Obviously, you can tell that the main subject is two kids are around thirds, right? But I'm adding an element of dynamics, which would be the subframing. But the subframing, the frame within a frame, is not framing the main subject. It's framing two other kids that are in the background, right? So this is something that's pretty cool because you are adding this technique, let's call it. I don't know if it's a technique, but it's a resource that you can find pretty much everywhere. The frame within a frame, and not only emphasize the main subject, you also can emphasize some other aspect of the picture. In this case, as I was saying, for me, the space is something very important in my work. So I like to show how the space. So for me, it's like a subject. So I try to use the elements also to emphasize different aspects of the background, for example. It's important to me. But it's an interesting example of how you can use different stuff that you have around to emphasize things, right? And another thing that I think it's important here, this is more for the color photographers, is that if you have noticed, the color combinations and the amount of color balance that there is in my pictures is also something that I look for when I'm composing. And this is interesting because there's a hierarchy on how you see colors in terms of which one you see first and which one you see last, which is pretty cool to look for, to know. Because, for example, the first color that you see is red, or especially the warmer colors, but especially red. And the last colors that you see are the cooler ones, especially blue, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have, and this is tricky, right? Because one of the kids has a blue jumper, right? But I think that his face is very warm. The other kid is in black and the face is very warm. The wall, this Adobe wall is quite warm as well because of the light. And then the background, which is the sky, is going to be blue. Therefore, it's not only working with the composition, but it's also the composition is emphasized by the choose of the color combination that is there, which is something that is going on in all of the pictures as well. Here, this is a good example of something that if you can look for monochromatics, I could choose another car that was whatever, right? It was, I don't know, green, it would be cool, but imagine that it was brown. It will be okay because brown is it's a neutral color in color theory, right? But red is the first color that we see. So if I choose, imagine that the car is white because there are plenty of white cars, or silver, or something like that, or blue, that also combines well with the red. I'm going to see first the background on the car, which in this case would be fine, right? But in another case where you have the first color that you see in the background, it can become a problem, right? So I always try to look for this kind of stuff. So where the colors are, and if it's going to distract from the sequence of reading of the viewer, if that makes sense. There's a color theory workshop in the platform that's pretty fantastic. Cristel,
someone needs to mute.
Sorry?
Oh, is that just me? Or?
The what?
I thought I heard something, but it was a video playing on my end. Sorry.
Okay. So, so if you're more interested in this color thing in the platform, these are like color theory works, so that is pretty cool. But it's important to have it in mind. Again, same thing. Main subject obviously is not going to be a silhouette. It's going to be these three men talking, having a chat in Morocco. But I want to add a little bit more of an interest and dynamics to the composition. So I'm including this subframing with this kid that it's a silhouette in there. It's going to give sense of depth, a little bit more dynamics. You can tell that it's someone younger. So I think it creates this interest, and it's quite easy to make this kind of compositions. It's just to be aware of your surroundings a little bit, and to look for this kind of stuff, right? Makes sense? So as you can tell, there's this foundation. My main subject is always going to be around rule of thirds, and then some of the times I'm going to try to add more dynamics and complexity. One of those techniques would be subframing. What would be another one? And this is one of my favorites. Well, let me go. Yeah, this is one of my favorites because it has a psychological aspect, why it works, and it also has a graphic aspect on why it works. The techniques, is people call it rule of odds, is to have an odd number of subjects in the frame, right? This is pretty cool because, again, having in mind that you always are going to have one of them in thirds, like is this case. You have obviously the kid that is looking to the camera, it's around thirds, is the closer to the camera. So you are going to start in this kid, obviously, right? There's no doubt. What happens is that if I want to add a little bit more complexity, I would say, okay, I could look for a frame within a frame. In this case, it was not available. So I'm going to look for an odd number of subjects. And this is interesting because if it's something that you look for and you think about, because there were more than 5 people in this situation. And I chose to pick 5 instead of 6 or 4 because I know how strong is this technique of the rule of odds, right? The first thing that makes it work, let me choose one that makes more sense, which is this one, for example. The first thing that makes it work is the geometry that it creates, right? You are going to start in rule of thirds, would be this lady here, or maybe this one, but probably this one because it's bigger in the frame. And you are creating a triangle, which is a geometry, and it's one of the strongest geometries that you can generate in a composition, right? If you can create a triangle, that means several things. That it's probably you're going to have someone in the foreground, someone in the middle ground, someone in the background. We're entering the realm of the layering, right? Maybe it's not super complex yet, but that's pretty much what it means to do a layered composition, is to have something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, and something in the background. If you look for 3 subjects or 3 main things, you create this geometry that is going to make you go through the whole frame because of that. Especially if you look for this girl is looking at, I don't know if she's looking at this girl in the pool or this other girl walking down the stairs, right? But you can tell that she's looking back. So you're going to start here and you're going to go from here to this lady, and then you go to this other lady maybe, and then you go back. So you look for the whole thing, and it's pretty much impossible for the viewer to not to go through the whole picture. If you have a triangle, it's such a powerful geometry that makes you look for that.
Very interesting picture.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. And it doesn't happen with other geometries. For example, it doesn't happen with squares. And it happens a little bit with circles, let's say, but there's a reason why triangles work so well, and an odd number of subjects work so well, is because our brains tend to look for process information as fast as we can, saving energy, right? Pretty much, this is something well established. So imagine that you go to the market and you want to buy 10 oranges, right? I'm pretty sure that everybody, almost everyone, goes through the oranges saying 2, 4, 6, 8. We tend to count in pairs, right? When it's a manageable amount of items, let's say, you tend to do it. Everybody tends to do it because it's easier. We can manage those numbers, but it's easier for us because we go faster and we think less. What happens when you show an odd number of stuff to someone, or an even number, is that they unconsciously they are going to count the amount of stuff that it's in the picture, even if they are not trying to count how many people it's there. Unconsciously they look for it, and the brain is pretty fantastic because it can tell if there is an odd number because you stop counting. So you look for the fourth subject and it's not there, and that creates engagement. It catches your attention, which is pretty cool, I think, right? That's why it's so important. And if you go through paintings of old masters, and if you go through great pictures in history, you are going to pretty much see that all of them have an odd number of subjects. If it's not something amazing happening, then it doesn't matter, right? Because the action is so interesting and so cool that it's not. And this is obviously something that you don't need to look for all the time. But if you have it in mind, it happens that you can frame in a way that it's going to emphasize any kind of thing that you want to show. And this being one of them, which is engagement. It's pretty cool because you can just avoid the fourth person if it's not important for the story or whatever is going on, right? And that's why it was so important for me at the beginning to say it's very interlinked, framing and composing, but it's not the same. You have to frame first and compose later, right? Because framing well means that you can choose how many subjects you have in your frame, and that's very powerful because you can do these kind of things later, right? Makes more or less sense?
A lot of sense.
There is questions or doubts or things like that?
So here we are still with framing. So we get the framing, the sub-framing, and the rule of odds, like techniques for
Exactly.
framing. Yeah, okay.
So the rule of odds is something, for example, in here, this is cool because you can choose one or the other techniques to add complexity. So let's establish that pretty much to have a solid picture, you look for this interesting and clean background, something that is not bothering. Depending on style, is going to be more or less busy, but the main subject is going to be around thirds. And you can choose if you want to add complexity to it and more dynamics. You can say, okay, I'm going to look for this available, some kind of subframing there. Well, there's nothing. Well, I'm going to look for, maybe what I would do is to try to look for odd subjects. Maybe it's not possible. So what you do is you look for all the things that we're going to look for right now. This is a good example of a very perfect triangle. And this is very important in this picture, actually, because obviously the first thing that you see, if you're not very apprehensive of animals, the first thing that you see is the guy with a knife that is pointing to the beheaded animal, right? But because there's a triangle there that is very clear, you're going to look for the kid as well. And what is important in this picture, a little bit more than the guy that just killed this goat, is that the kid is wearing a knife as well. And this is something pretty fun because people tend to think with this picture, and this is part of a project that it's about the Sahara and that I have been doing for 4 or 5 years. What it's important is that people tend to think that the knife that the kid has, it's a real knife. Like, oh, look at these people giving knives, beheading goats in the Sahara. They're like, it's whatever, right? But it's a toy, actually. It's not a real knife, which is interesting because a cool thing about photography is you can try to create certain comings and goes with emotions with the viewers, to have also not only the visual dynamics, but also the emotional dynamics when they go through a story, right? Some of the things that they are going to see, they're going to be more relatable. Some of them are going to be not relatable, but still you can try to push and make wonder the viewer to certain things. So the point being that you can stress a part of the picture that it's a little bit more suggestive, it's a little bit more discrete in the main action, but because of the composition, you're going to see it no matter what. That's why it's pretty powerful. It's another example of rule of odds with, instead of 3 people, it's 5 people, but you still can see pretty obviously that there is a triangle forming there, right? So I think it's interesting. And here, obviously, as well, you can see that it's a very strong triangle forming that helps you to go through a picture that is quite busy. I tend to look for very clean backgrounds because it tends to be distracting what's going on in the background for me. So
with this picture, there are several triangles, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly. When you have more than 3 people and you start to create geometries, you can develop more than one triangle. In this case, there's 5, and also there is this spot that is serving me a little bit as a frame within a frame as well.
Okay, this is a triangle, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it creates, as you say, another triangle. So, but even if it looks something complicated, all of those things, what they are doing are helping the viewer to decipher what's going on, right? And that's the key of composing. Is so there's these philosophers that they say that photography is a language like any other language, like English, but it's tricky because the code is not really well established. For a language, you need a meter, a code, a medium, and a receiver of that thing, right? And the code in photography is always tricky, but the foundation of the code in photography is always going to be the composition of it, because it's what makes you go through it. Even if it feels complicated, it makes it easier for the viewer. Any question, doubts, comments?
Are there any other like geometrical shapes that work well for composing?
In general, all the geometrical shapes, even squares, all of those things, any kind of geometry that you can generate through composition is always going to be stronger than no geometry, right? And all the things that we're talking about, if you think about it for a moment, even if you start to do frames within a frame, there's going to be a geometry implied there, right? Because of the properties of the thing itself. It's going to be a window that is going to be squared, for example. That's a geometry that in that case is focusing you in a thing. But any kind of geometry always is going to be strong. And if you apply these different elements, rule of odds, subframing, and in this case that we're going to talk about guiding lines, also you are going to start to create geometries through vanishing points, through connections between subjects and stuff like that, right? This is something that is going back a little bit to the basic stuff, which is diagonals and leading lines, right? Something it's also something very, very easy to find in the streets or anywhere, but it's very, very powerful. Again, very simple, right? You have the main subject, which is this guy that it's obviously in rule of thirds. It's also closer to the camera. And then you have this very clear line that's leading you towards this other group. This is Lisbon. This was a story about the aging population in Lisbon. And they have a problem going on with the elder people, like anywhere else in the West. And I thought that was interesting, this situation in the street, because you have this group of people that probably they were just having a cigarette after work, something like that. And then there's this guy that was sitting there alone. And I think that it's an interesting picture, because it's easy to read and it's easy to see. If you know the context, it's easy to decipher the story with this picture. And it's just so simple that you have a line that it's a diagonal that goes through one corner to the other in the frame. And also it's a leading line that is leading the viewer from the main subject towards the other part of the picture that I'm interested in showing. You can find it leading lines in anywhere, and like in the ground using like the road. It becomes a leading line, even if it's a very, very simple picture like this one. Subjects in thirds, there's nothing else there, but this how you call it, this road, whatever, this trail,
Country road,
marks, whatever it's called, they're leading you towards, and even these tiny lines in the fields, all of them are leading you towards the face of the guy, right? So using the space is very cool because you can use it in a way that creates efficiency and how the viewer is going to understand the picture. They are not going to know what's going on necessarily if they don't understand photography, but definitely they are going to be more engaged with it. If you look for, and I would argue that leading lines and diagonals also form some kind of geometry, right? That maybe spills into outside the frame, maybe, but it creates a dynamism in the picture that's pretty cool, even if it's such a simple picture like this one. Another cool thing that I think that with leading lines and diagonals, it has another use that I find very cool, which is something that is more atmospheric. When you create some kind of vanishing point, it gives this sense of leaving the place, of journey, of travel. It's implied on the idea of a vanishing point, right, somehow, which is powerful because if you want to use that in that sense, again, in anywhere you can find leading lines, anywhere. And
can you explain this, please? Vanishing point? I don't know. A vanishing point?
A vanishing point means that you have a perspective in the space, in the background, or in the a scene that it's vanishing into the background, basically. So
it's all leading. Yeah,
okay. It's leading towards nowhere, basically, right? So if you use it properly, if you use it well, and I think that this is a good example, I would argue, is that you have these two people that they are living this sense of going somewhere, and that creates a sense of mystery, creates a sense of traveling, of journey, of going somewhere, that it's also very engaging with the viewer, because it creates this, the whole thing about composing and try to engage with people, it seems a little bit out of the arts, if you like. It seems like, okay, this feels very mathematic, feels very, very square. But I think that what we try when we show pictures to people is we're asking for undivided attention, right? We're saying, don't swipe up, keep looking, because I have something to say here. So if we use consciously all of these tools, the viewer is going to engage with it because they are going to feel and understand things in the way that you want them to understand it, right? So it's interesting to know what happens when you put someone living with a vanishing point or a leading line, is that the viewer is going to understand precisely what you want to mean with that. And I think that that's very powerful if we have it in mind. So also you can use it more like purely as an aesthetic thing, as a tool. Like it's just there because it creates dynamics, right? This is pointing to places, and that's it. I mean, there is no more than that in here, that the chairs, the benches are creating diagonals, and that's our dynamic elements in the frame in a very static situation, which again,
and they lead to the sides.
Exactly. So it creates a little bit of engagement as well, in that sense, that something that's very paused, is very static, and I think that you are not going towards trying to make the most dynamic environment of a church, but you still want the viewer to go through the frame, right, and see what's going on, not only with the women or not only with the saints. You want them to go through all of it. So diagonals and leading lines are always going to be pretty fantastic, and you can emphasize lines as well, like in this case. You can use them very deliberately and very almost obviously, right, to lead you towards a phase in this case. But at the same time, what's happening is that you are creating this depth that I find very interesting in photography, which is complicated to make because it's a bidimensional surface, a picture, really, right? So any tool that you can use to create three-dimensionality, depth, it's always going to be dynamic by itself because the viewer understands the distances between stuff, right? And that's always very useful. And you can be more in your face, like in this case, or you can be a little bit more subtle, like the one in the benches in the church. But what I think, what I want to also, I want to stress it a lot is that if you see it, the main subject is also in thirds. It's right there, right? So I'm using other elements to create these dynamics and these things, but the main stuff, it's going to be the same foundation for all of the pictures, right? You can find leading lines through just light and shadow, right? I think it's a cool idea as well, because we tend to look for physical things to create these leading lines and diagonals and things like that. But through light and understanding how light works and the use of the shadows, the use of the space, basically, you can create a leading line here that goes towards the main guy, which is around thirds, so it's also in red, and it's looking to this lady walking and through this ray of light that creates a leading line, basically. Right? Obviously, you could say that the guy is looking at her anyway, but I think that graphically it's more interesting and a little bit stronger this way.
Yeah, also the line in the background leads to the woman. No?
Exactly.
The graffiti.
So there's an implied geometry there as well.
Very interesting.
That I like. It's less obvious than of the other geometries because it's in the shade, but it's still there. Any question, any doubt? Nothing? Everything is super clear?
Very interesting.
Okay. So we're going to talk about famous layering. I would say that this is something, as we were talking at the beginning, this is something that people is quite intrigued with, the layering thing. But also I want to stress that layered pictures are important to have them if it makes sense to have them, right? If you want to imply it in the message, in the picture, that loneliness, stuff like that, I don't know, any kind of thing that it doesn't go with complexity, if you start to add complexity, is going to not make you any favor, right? Because you are having two different concepts fighting. So we need to keep in mind what happens when you have a very heavily layered picture. And I think that this is a good example of it, because one of the things that I find interesting with the layered pictures is that they are more useful when you want to talk about the spaces than the people that it's there. Because even though, as probably if some of you are counting, there's an odd number of subjects here. How is there an odd number of subjects, I'm going to ask?
The mask wearing?
Because there's 6 people, but I'm subframing the picture in 2 sides. So there's 3 and 3. That's why it works as an odd number of subjects. But the thing is that none of them are going to be, even if I have my foundation in this guy, my baseline in the composition is obviously this man because he's on thirds closest to the camera, all of those things. The picture is not really about this guy. It's more or less about the dynamics of the space. So I tend to argue that very heavily layered pictures, they tend to be talking more about the space than whoever is there. right? Which is something it's important to have in mind, because if you are imagine that you are developing some kind of documentary-esque kind of project, you're talking about more specific kind of people or something like that, and you start to do too many complicated layered pictures, the viewer is going to get lost in who is the protagonist in the story, or who are the protagonists in the story, right? Because there's just too many things going on, and none of them are going to be the main stuff anywhere. So I would argue that the main subject in a heavily layered picture is going to be the space. But it's pretty cool, because going back to the beginning, to those pictures that we were talking about, the ones that you need to develop any kind of project, establishing shots, detail, action, and who is there, I think that the layered pictures work well as establishing shot, and also sometimes as an action, but especially as establishing shot. Maybe not establishing where you are in the planet, right? Not where you are in a city, because it can be closer frame, so you don't necessarily need to know where's this picture. What's going on here? Where is this picture taken? But if I tell you that it's Morocco, it makes sense, right? Because I say, okay, I can imagine that it could be Morocco, Marrakesh, right? But if I tell you that the main story about this picture is the barber,
yeah, the barber, I would say so.
It doesn't really make sense that I'm taking this complexity if I'm going to talk about the barber. Maybe to give context to the story, because I want to say that this barber is working in the Medina in Marrakesh, and it's a busy place, and the guy, it has loads of people waiting for him because he's super nice, or he's the cheapest guy in Marrakesh, whatever, right? But it's never going to be a portrait of the person. It's more as establishing idea of what's going on and where, right?
So just let's get about this barber. So you established the idea of the barber, or you established the idea that somebody like this famous man is, or this busy man is working in the Medina in Morocco?
I'm establishing the idea of the Medina is a busy place. And if you see the body of work, which is going to be my Substack actually next week about the Medina. If you see the body of work, you're going to see that there's different elements. And one of them is that the Medina is busy and it's alive and all of that stuff. And I want to establish that through outside, right, like squares and the streets, but also inside places. Like it's going to be businesses, it's going to be homes of people, where I want to show this concept. I want to establish that it's a busy place, there's things going on, that people is welcoming, and all of those qualities that I like a lot about Morocco, for example, right? So it's not establishing in this case what's going on with this guy, because it's not the story, but it could be. I could have a story about the barber and follow him around and having his portrait and going to his house and doing different things. And this one would be that he's a busy guy, right? It would establish that you are in a busy place and you're a busy guy and there's something going on, right? Same thing happens in this one, for example. You would imagine that it's during COVID and they're disinfecting the thing or something like that, right? So you're establishing some kind of idea. Maybe you are not establishing where you are, but it's not a great or fantastic action either. It's a little bit of information of what's happening, but it's not like super dynamic. It's more of, this is the concept of what's going on, right? Again, this is another example of, this is not the most dynamic action, right? A dynamic action, we would imagine that it's, if you are going to show kids playing in a basketball field, you are going to show them playing with the ball, maybe running, stuff like that. And in here, I want to suggest the idea that this is a playful place where kids go to play and do things. And this is the kind of environment where these kids are playing, which is the point of this picture. It's not really that the kids are playing, is that this is the place and this is how they play.
It's very dynamic.
Yeah,
Mm.
but what I think it's cool about this technique is that you can get this very dynamic pictures without having a very dynamic action. Yeah, I think it's cool, right? I mean, it's kind of dynamic. They are climbing the fence and stuff like that, but they are not like in the middle of a huge like action, super energetic kind of thing, right? It's quite static actually, what's going on, but it
Yeah.
has a sense of depth and it has a sense of rhythm.
Yeah, with this
that-
the leg in front on the left hand side is very, it's like you're guiding line.
the what? Sorry.
The leg in front of the boy who's climbing front left. So
Yes.
it's like a guiding line somehow. It's you get-
Yeah, there's a little bit of subframing here. There is a little bit of course. I would say that the main subject always going to be the guy that you can see the face. It's looking at the camera, or is looking towards the camera. It's around thirds. It would be this kid that is in orange. That would be the main subject. And in here, it's interesting because I'm using this guy to frame him.
Mhm.
The legs that also are adding some kind of idea of movement and things going on, but it's used, even if it sounds a little bit tricky, as a thing, right, to give sense of depth and to translate the message of what's happening. But I'm framing this other kid with the legs of this kid, adding the playfulness, a little bit of information with the shoes that they are broken. There is another subframing here. So you start to create these different layers of complexity. But the foundation, again, is going to be very simple, right? So you start with a rule of thirds and the main subject, and you say, oh, that kid over there is going to go through that's a subframe. That's a frame within a frame as well. And the foreground, the closest thing to me, also works kind of a frame within a frame. It also I can use to subframe the main subject. So this 80%, I did like, May was asking about how many pictures do I take in this kind of stuff. In something like this, it was very busy. There was things going on. I took around 25 pictures, for example. And there are others that I like, slightly bit different, because all of them, they were doing the same stuff all the time. But I like, in this one, I thought that it was more interesting to keep working the scene because the action was going to be more or less the same all the time, very similar. They were doing this kind of play. I don't know what they were doing, playing together with climbing there, doing whatever.
The boy on the top, he's gonna jump down. One where you only see the legs.
Yeah, this guy didn't. They were jumping down from from behind this blue building. They were doing something with a ball and just playing, right? But more or less the sequence of events, the direction of what was going on was similar all the time. So I envisioned what I could do. I saw, okay, I have this fence foreground, so I know that they are climbing those things. I have this other stuff that can work as a frame within a frame. For example, these legs is something that I saw afterwards. I was looking for this kid, not for this one in particular. I was looking for someone here, someone in this fence, and someone here, looking for these three subjects, or these four here, right? But in this case, I think it still works because of it's quite complex.
I think they make it really interesting, these pending legs there.
Yeah.
Because you really think, okay, where do they come from?
Yeah. And I like it. And it makes you imagine that they were climbing and going there because there is someone there as well. But yeah, the point would be that this is a picture that it's talking about more about the place than the kids themselves, right? And the foundation of it, it's an easy foundation.
The hanging legs and the half arms and stuff is very Alex Webb. Yeah, he does a lot of that stuff. It's very, and when you first look at it, it's like, I don't get it. And then when you start to peel the photo back, you realize more and more and more how much it makes sense, and it plays an important part of the story and the picture.
Exactly. So that's a little bit the thing. That's why I was saying at the beginning that if you do too many of these things,
it
gets too complicated to understand what's going on. And but
This is my favorite. This is one of my favorite pictures, images that you took. When I remember when that popped up during another presentation, it was like it just was perfect. It was
it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool, and it's and I would say that doing this kind of stuff, it's pretty easy to do. It requires a little bit of patience and be aware of the space as well. More than once you know that you have your foundation, you know the distances, you know where the things are happening. It's easy to make. I could do this thing every day without any problem. So I try not to do it because I want to have more dynamics and more because this is flashy. I mean, this is a fancy picture. It's something that if I show this to my mom, she's going to say, okay, kids playing, so what, right? This is something that is interesting for us, but this is not a thing that someone just looking at the magazine or something is going to say, oh, wow, it's great. What a composition. They don't care about those things. So I train myself every day to try to look for this narrative kind of idea, this kind of things. And sometimes this kind of pictures, it works inside those narratives. But if you only do this, and it's easy to fall into this trap, because once you know how to do it, it becomes easy to do, right? You lose the narrative. You only have flashy pictures to post on Instagram to get likes, right? If you go to, I have this picture in the Substack in the first post that I posted there, and I'm talking about the sequence goes through this older lady and this young lady that they were telling me that it was the young lady, obviously, saying that they did the paperwork to go to Spain. They were moving there next year and they saved loads of money because there was no future in Cuba. So the next picture in that sequence was the kids. So there's a juxtaposition between the concept of saying that there is no future in a place and then showing kids playing, that they don't have concept of future there yet. So it's for the viewer to think, okay, this woman, this lady is saying that there's no future in here, but those kids playing in this place, they don't know it yet. So what's going to happen with them, right? I try to make the viewer ask questions about the situation, about what's going on. So there is a point in making this kind of picture joining with a portrait of a lady, right? It makes sense together, not just this picture. This picture alone, it makes sense for us photographers, because we say, oh, this is cool. It's a fancy composition, but that's it. Any question or any doubt? Any comment? No? What do you want to say, Denise? Let me
I was
know.
gonna say that I couldn't do that. Like you said, you could just do that easy. I don't know. I
Well-
tried to get action shots. I remember when I was in when we were in New Orleans that last time and we were walking through a park or something, and there were the kids playing, and I
Yeah.
tried really hard to get like pieces, you know,
Yeah.
all over. And I did pick one that I thought was good, but
I mean,
it
you
was
have
nothing.
pretty fantastic stuff. You know that I like a lot how you photograph, but
Yeah.
it's important to know that there are differences in style. So your style is not the same as mine, and I always
Right.
praise your eye to
But that
catch
framing,
interest.
yeah, that framing of the legs and then that boy in the background, that just to me was something that I try to do frame in frame and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that was absolutely an amazing, that was like a top. It just took
Yeah.
my breath away when I saw it. So that's all, nothing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But it's not your thing to do that kind of stuff all the time. It's from
Yeah.
time to time if it happens, because what you do, which is what you should do, because it's your style, you are looking for the expressions in the faces, this kind of stuff, and you cannot look for both. So, or you look for one thing or the other, right? Sometimes if you train yourself and you try to look for a couple of these pictures, you will do it, obviously, and you have some of them, I've seen them,
Yeah.
right? but it's not.
But it's
really your
fascinating. The action, knowing where to position yourself to get the frame in frame. There's a lot that goes into trying to get something like that composition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Also, one of the tricks would be to be very comfortable and very aware of your lens. It helps a lot to do this kind of stuff. So
what lens did you use for that image?
I always use the 23. That will be a 35.
That would be a 35
in full frame. So the 23 in Fuji.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the most manageable and versatile kind of fixed lens. It's the one that I think that I can do a little bit of everything. When I do portraits and things like that are more specific, I maybe use a 50 or a 35, like the one that you have that I love. But yeah, for action things going on, reportage, like fast things, the 23 or 35 in full frame is the one that I use.
Thank you for that.
Again, this picture, this is a good example of the thing about the rule of odds and creating a subject, creating a geometrics, and talking about one thing that I find very fantastic is it doesn't matter that there is 7 people in the thing, which is odds. If you look for having an odd number of subjects, there is more than 5, it's just a group. It doesn't work anymore, this idea of the rule of odds, because it's just too many people, right? But what you can do, what I find very fantastic, is that if you group them, you can start to work with triangles and rule of odds as well. So I would say that these 5 ladies here, because of how they are together and how the picture is framed and composed, it works as a single subject, right? Of course, they are single. They are not single unity. There are 5 people, but in sense of the weight in the picture, they works as a one unit, right? And then you can do your main subject will be the group. It's one subject, and then you have this monk that was taking selfies there, which is pretty fantastic. And then this guy that looks like, what I like about this picture is that you have this monk that's taking a selfie, these ladies with this very old style clothing for the aperture, and then this guy that looks like he's doing how you call it, like a walk through the country. And I like the contrast. But what's going on here is that the composition, it's basically the same. So I have this group in thirds as a group. Obviously, the main one, if you are very mathematical, is going to be probably this lady here, but as a group is around thirds. And then you have these other 2 elements that are going to create this triangle, this rule of odds, that are going to make you go through all the ladies, maybe towards this guy or this other guy, but there's no way that you go out the loop here, right? Especially because even the background that it's Annapurna, even if it's interesting and good looking, it's quite simple, right? So it's a simple picture, but it's I think it's quite strong because of that. Because even if there's loads of elements going on and many people, the simplicity of the geometry makes it easier to read.
I wouldn't say it's so simple, this picture.
The what, sorry?
I would not say that it's a very simple picture.
Well, it's simple in terms that I decided that the group of women, they were going to be a unit. Therefore, I'm going to put that group in rule of thirds. I'm going to treat it as just one thing, right? One entity. And these other 2 people, they are going to be other 2 people. Therefore, I have my 3 subjects, let's say, right? Okay. Even though there's not 3 subjects, I'm treating the group as one.
Yep.
That's the way that visually, if you squint, you call it when you are like take out the glasses.
Yeah, squint.
Squint. You see three weights in the picture, right? When you don't recognize the faces, you see 3 shapes with different weights, right? That's why it makes it simpler to read. Maybe I wouldn't say that it's a simple picture if you like, but simple to read somehow.
Okay. And why do they look so wary, these women? I
Why they
was
look so
wondering this
what?
when wary, like they are not comfortable.
Because they
Yeah.
were this was an inauguration of a temple in the Himalayas, and they were very punctual, and everyone else was quite late, so they were there quite for a long time, and they are like, oh fuck, we are on this, let's go. Right, come on, let's
Okay.
open the thing. But as you can see, I mean, these two are like, okay, let's go, but these two were joking, and you can tell that she's about to laugh and stuff, and this guy is thinking, what the fuck is this guy doing here in the middle of the Himalayas in Manang taking pictures, and the monk here is taking a selfie, which I found fantastic. But there's a little bit of different stuff.
But I also think that would you say that the tops of the mountains serve as leading lines as well?
Yeah, you could say it.
And
It works
they
well.
actually are like a leading line all by themselves because of the perspective that you had.
Exactly. That's what I would say, is that the intention behind it is that the group of ladies are doing as a leading line more than
The
the
group of
background.
ladies are the leading line. Yeah, because it's because of the perspective you had. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And this is another example of using the main subject being this group, being in the middle ground, which I find interesting, that you can have main subjects in the three distances as well. It doesn't need to be always the closest to the camera, right? In this case, it's obviously not, because he's the back of the guy. It's just creating a visual weight to fill a space, basically. And I like the hat because the event it was called Hats and Horses, so I like the hat and the suit and all that and the color. But the main subject is this group of people, right? That they are having this drink, talking. This lady, actually, she's a quite famous actress in Spain. They're talking about something that feels weird, and you have to see the horse, and there's a bit of different dynamics in different planes of the picture, right? But the foundation, again, is quite easy. Is that this group, this lady and this group of these three people, they are in rule of thirds, pretty basic, with a nice background, and that's it. So when I started to see that in between races, some of them that were I don't know what to call it. They were like training between races, whatever, warming or something like that. And the people, instead of looking at the horses, they were like going to have drinks, getting stuff, like talking with each other. That's why it feels way more dynamic, because I waited for that moment. So I saw that in between people were standing and going to places. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to do something when that happens, when it's between races.
But you know, the other thing is her head is not obstructing the horse training in the back.
Yes, that's
And
something
if it
that
were, if that horse was a little further over and he was behind her head, then it wouldn't have been right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that was like it's like the horse framed her.
It's in the right position, and I did like 25 pictures to get that.
Certainly. And it could be an establisher for a movie set. Completely.
What, sorry?
An establishing shot for a movie set. This was
yeah,
like
it's
you know.
the lights. It was very beautiful. It's interesting. It was almost sunset, and the setting is quite interesting. And obviously the fanciness of the suits and the hats and all those things. It's very good looking. It's a thing that happens every year here in Menorca. It's always, and they invite me, and it's fun, and it's very good looking. And it's very cool to do pictures. But yeah, but what I want to say is that if you analyze what's going on, the foundation of it is quite easy, right? It's only being a little bit aware of the distances between foreground, middle ground, and background, and to think a little bit, to foresee, imagine, and to observe what can happen, and try to work it. sometimes it doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes you are there and you say, okay, this is something that has happened a couple of times. I'm going to look for the third one, and then the guy goes away. So you lose the picture, right? And you do other thing. And I have more pictures that are different that I also like. They have a little bit of a different resonance, if you like that. But this
Could
one
I
I
ask
think is a good example. Yes.
I have a question though. What was your depth of field? What was your aperture?
F11.
Everything is sort of kind of in focus, or
Yeah.
maybe not, but
The main focus is in this
it's here. But the
it's
one
good.
that's closest to you is also really in focus as well.
Yeah. If you see the picture closely, it's a little bit more out of focus, but I
Oh,
was
okay. Yeah, I
F-
see that now. Okay.
I was
Yeah.
F11, something like that.
Okay, but you were definitely focusing on the three
Yeah.
people.
Yes.
So the others are softer, but still kind of sharp, but that's because it was
Yeah.
F11.
Exactly. And this is
Okay.
one of the things that I like about APS-C cameras, is that you can have the same field of view, but you have a little bit more depth of field. So
Which camera? Which
the
camera?
Fujis, for example, the
The
APS-C,
Fuji, yes.
you have more depth of field, which is something that I prefer, is to have more depth of field, right?
Right.
And for example, what happens is that in an APS-C camera, if you have an F11, it would be plus 1.5, so it would be like F16 almost. Oh. Well, it will be, yeah, it will be 1.5 more the aperture that you need for a full frame camera to have the same depth of field. That's why I prefer APS-C cameras, but that's nonsense what I'm saying. So
What is an APS-C camera? I don't know this. I forget.
It's a crop sensor camera.
Like a DX, not FX. But
Exactly. In Nikon would
yeah,
be
DX.
DX.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you.
In Nikon is DX. FX will be full frame. Yeah. So people often ask me, why you don't go full frame? Well, because my style, it fits to have more depth of field. I prefer it. So for me, an APS-C camera works better than a full frame.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another example of the same thing: main subject, blue thirds, some kind of frame within a frame, triangle, looking for depth. It's pretty simple, right? But you go through the whole frame pretty much instantly. So I think it's pretty cool. Here is a little bit more in the edge of what is orthodox, but obviously you have this gate here. It's in thirds, and then you start to go to the geometries and all that stuff.
Where is this?
It's in India, in Jaipur.
So in this picture, in this image, the fact that there's the main boy with the blue shirt, and then there's the other someone behind him.
Yeah.
And like I was always nervous about overlap.
The overlappings, yes.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
But in this
actually.
case, you can see his eyes. So does that sort of make it not a deal breaker?
Yeah, you know what happens is that from this
I don't know if
overlap.
that's a bad question. I don't know.
No, it is a great question actually, because people, when they try to look for this layered stuff, this complex composition, they get very, very frustrated sometimes with some overlappings. And I would say that years ago it used to bother me a lot, overlappings, and now there are some overlappings that I find it doesn't work, like something like a pulp growing from the head. But there are some of them that I think that
works.
It makes it more real if there is a little bit of an off balance of some stuff, let's say, right?
I think it works because the guy in back, he has his skin color is a little bit darker than the guy in the front.
Yeah.
So there is a contrast here, and so it works. I think it works perfectly.
Yeah, me too. I think it works. But on paper, people that likes to do this kind of stuff, they tend to say there's an overlapping there. So there's many people that they wouldn't choose that picture because of that. So,
yeah, but I think for me it works because I'm seeing his eye.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I think if I didn't see his eye, then it might have been something where I felt like it was just a mistake, but in this case, you don't know if it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And what happened actually is that the guy that is behind the kid, he was covering, so he was hiding.
Mm.
He was
And
hiding.
I catch him in that moment of going a little bit behind the kid. That's
So
what's
He's
going
also
on.
not. He's also not the main subject of the photo either. It's so, I mean, I think when you have two people touching like that, you don't necessarily need to worry about isolating their heads.
Exactly. But if there was, if this plant was here, I wouldn't choose the picture, for example.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that will be another thing. So I tend to prefer when there is a little bit of imperfections in the picture, because when I started, I was too precise, and I think that when you are too precise, it loses a little bit of soul. So I prefer when it's not perfect. I prefer when there's a little bit of stuff going on, not weird overlappings, but something like this. I could use it. For example, this picture is an example that I like a lot because of that, actually.
Cool.
So the fact that this kid jumped last moment, I catch it. It wasn't it was not my intention, actually. It was obviously looking for these two and these two, right? This kid was like, hey, I want to be here as well. So, but I find it fun and interesting it's more playful, which is what it was. The setting, it was playful, it was nice, it was they were happy because this was during Ramadan, so they were about to go to eat, and us as well. So it was a beautiful moment. And actually, this girl named Fatima, she's looking at her mom, like, come on, let's come home, let's go to eat, stuff like that. So it's pretty fun. I like it, this picture. Precisely one of the things that makes me like this picture is the fact that there's this almost you can tell that she jumped right in the last moment to the picture, and I like that. Right.
I thought the family vintage was really cute because it makes you feel, sometimes wording isn't good to have in, but this one, it's almost like they're just family. It's really cute.
Yeah, and it creates a little bit of contrast between this lady, this young girl with the whole princess thing that she was wearing very proudly, and I find it fun. I don't know. I like a lot this place as well. I'm very comfortable.
The people. So the girl with the pink sweater, she looks to her mom, and so this is also, isn't this also a guiding line when the people look in a certain direction when they?
Yeah.
You use it.
I use it quite a bit, and also I use it in a way that is not very orthodox, which is usually people tell you that the subjects should be looking towards inside the frame, right? And one thing that I like a lot to do is precisely the opposite, is having the subject looking towards outside the frame, because it creates this sense of wondering as to what she's looking for, what she's looking to, what's going on there. So it creates a little bit of interest, in my opinion. So
you did the same thing with the flamethrower shot as well, because I think most people would want to have the flame shooting towards the heavy part of the frame, but you have him shooting out to the left, which is different.
It's not very orthodox, but I like that because it creates this tension that you don't really know where this guy is doing that stuff. If there is more people, it makes you wonder. And I think that photography is most powerful when it makes you ask stuff more than just showing things. I prefer to suggest things and to have a conversation with the viewer, and than just explaining things. I'm not a photojournalist, so I don't need to be so obvious that I'm not illustrating news. I'm trying to have a narrative and suggest things. So I tend to be very orthodox in the sense that the foundation of the pictures usually are going to be very specific, like rule of thirds. But with these other things, is the things that I play with. So looking to outside the frame, the action is going outside the frame as well. Some strange crops with people, things like that. I prefer to play with that kind of things because I know that because I'm basing the composition in a proper way, the viewer is not going to get distracted with strange things happening. The viewer is going to go through the frame the same, even if I'm cropping weirdly some stuff, right? Or having the direction of the eyes, lines of visual tension, it's called, where they look, it's going outside. It creates a little bit of wondering that I think it's very cool.
Mhm.
One thing that I would say that it's less to do with the actual technique of composing is that, and this is more, May was asking about how many pictures do you take and stuff. I tend to, when I'm going to do this kind of things, I tend to spend time. There's no way, no matter what whoever tells you, that you're going to catch this kind of stuff just in one frame. I mean, you can be lucky from time to time, but this is something that you have to spend some time figuring out if it can happen, what you look for. People need to be comfortable with you there. So I would say that spending some time in the corners where you feel like you can do this kind of things, it's important, because it allows you for them to forget about you, first of all, that you are not just the guy that appears there. It's okay, I spend it maybe 20, there's a video on YouTube actually where I'm taking this picture that you can watch. It's about street photography in Havana, and someone was recording me taking this picture, and you can tell that no one is looking at me, because I was there for maybe half an hour, had a drink, and then I started to take pictures.
Yeah, it gets more and more difficult. People look at you the moment you take out a camera.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
spending time in a corner, try to figure out if you can work, the people getting comfortable with you there. It's important to generate this kind of complexity.
I like this Eintracht Frankfurt. It's a football club from Frankfurt.
Yeah, so it's a fun corner in Havana. And that's it. I think that this is the last one. So is there any doubt, any question, something that you want to comment, talk about, wonderings? Everything is super clear.
This was great. It was so interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's well, all of you, you guys use these things. I think that the what I would say is that, because all of you know these things like leading lines, triangles and geometries and rule of thirds, everybody knows it. My intention with this workshop is to say that you can start with a solid foundation and start to build up from there. Is how you make it more dynamic. Using one other thing or two or all together would be the complex stuff, but just adding one thing, okay, rule of thirds plus frame within a frame, rule of thirds plus diagonals and leading lines, rule of thirds plus robots, or rule of thirds plus diagonals and robots, right? Then you can play with your compositions and build dynamics around something that is already solid. You will have a solid picture anyway, 80% solution. Then from there, fill the 20% more with something that you find around, and go to the 100% with something that is already good, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think my takeaway is I'm just going to try and be more intentional about using some of the different things that we went over today, because I mean, I do think about them when I'm out shooting, but making sure that I consider it more as part of, okay, how am I composing a picture when I'm thinking about trying to tell a story as part of the narrative,
Yeah.
And making sure that I mix it up and don't, repeat myself too much.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking, actually, because you can repeat yourself a lot. But I would say that if you have in mind less the technique and more the ideas behind the pictures, Meaning, for example, the framing, it's something that it's going to give you variety, for example, right? Because when you frame is what's going to give you different things to compose with, even if the composition itself is similar. And as you can see in all of the examples that I have, the compositions are not super different. They're quite similar actually, but I'm framing in a different ways, right? I'm framing different things, different backgrounds, different subjects and stuff like that. That's why it looks different, but the foundation of the compositions itself, they are not very different in general. And I would tell you that go to The Suffering of Light of Alex Webb, you will see that he does the same. There is a foundation always. There's something where you are going to start to look at the picture that is going to be probably 90% of the times in rule of thirds, and from there is going to be some kind of rule of odds. He's going to play with geometry, not all the time, but pretty much 90%, 95% of the time, it's going to be the same kind of foundation. And if you go to some of the people that it's complex in a different way, let's say someone like David Allen Harvey, for example, even if he's not a nice person, he has very powerful work. And David Allen Harvey, apparently he was doing bad stuff with women, harassing women, but his work is quite powerful. And if you look at his way of composing, it's going to be very similar to what Alex Webb does, for example, but in a rougher way, let's say. But the foundation is going to be as well, it's going to be the same. And if you go to the other side of the spectrum, that would be someone very classic, very clean, like Steve McCurry, for example, he does the same thing as well. He's going to be always founding the composition with rule of thirds, and from there he's going to use the background in certain ways. The use of the light and color is going to play even a little bit more than the complexity maybe, but the foundation always starts in the same position. That's why I try to insist in this so much, because so many people says break the rules, don't follow the rules, all of those things, and I think it's quite nonsense, because what makes a composition work precisely is the understanding that people has and how you can read a picture and how a composition can relate with another picture in a sequence, for example. Right? Imagine that you have somehow one of those pictures that creates a triangle with three people, and then the pairing of that picture, it's an actual triangle. Those pictures are going to work well together because of the geometry itself, right? So if everything is random, if you break the rules all the time and with everything, you can push with things as with these weird crops, if you like, with use a little bit of movement, or look for more interesting expressions and think a little bit less about the backgrounds, if you like. That's fine. That's personal style, right? But the foundation is always going to be the same. The personal style is going to appear more in the stories that you want to tell. Is going to appear more in the kind of framing that you do, the kind of light that you prefer, the kind of color combinations that you prefer. I tend to do more simple color combinations because I'm colorblind. So I look for complementary colors that I know that works, and monochromatic pictures, right? And that's it. If you have a great understanding of color, you can be more complex with that, which would be the case of someone like Steve McCurry, for example. He does quite a complex things with color, or Harry Gruyer. I Dorothy can say the name of the guy better than I do, but Harry Gruyer. I don't know how do you.
Gruyer? Is he French?
He's Belgium, from Belgium, but he speaks French. But yeah, so this guy does a crazy, weird combinations of colors, super complex, and it's all intentional. It's not luck. He looks for it. So his complexity comes from color, for example, instead of weird layered stuff.
I like this, what you say, that there are some fundamental rules that we should not break, and then that we can play with them like more superficial rules, maybe.
Yeah, because the rest are not really rules. The rest are something that is is something that people
Like
establish
aesthetics.
at some point as an aesthetic that
Mhm.
works,
Mhm.
which is okay. And those things are the ones that you can just take to your terrain and change and play with it, right? But if you look, and it's not just photographers like Alex Webb, if you go to Vermeer,
The old
Goya,
painters. Mhm, mhm.
they follow the same rules, and some of them they do weird crops, they use different techniques, different kind of slides, but all of those things. But the foundation of how they compose the paintings are quite basic, actually, which is interesting to think about. Why are we going to say to Leonardo da Vinci, "Fuck you, break the rules," right? So yeah, he did break the rules quite a bit, but the ones that you can break, not the ones that you cannot.
I think he broke so many rules for his time. He was one of the biggest rule breakers, but he established for us. Maybe he established rules for us. Because
Yeah,
I think he was quite contestable, but it's another story.
yeah. And it's interesting to go through history to see what happened with great masters and pretty much with something close to realism. Obviously, if you go to cubism, all different kinds of styles, it's different, but something that is close to reality somehow. They tend to follow similar fundamental rules. And
Yeah, certainly.
then they go crazy with other things, obviously, which is what we should do, right?
Jörg, sorry, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,